expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. There are 18 days left until the election, and political stories are popping all over the place. Control of both houses of Congress hangs in the balance. Republicans would like the election to be yesterday, and Democrats are trying to do anything they can to keep control. Meanwhile, the leader of the party, the president, already appears to be looking ahead to the post-November period. To talk about a couple of the key races and the president, we're going to man up with Politico's editor-in-chief John Harris. John, welcome. I want to run a little clip from last night's debate in Nevada in which that phrase came up. Let's take a quick look at it.
Man up, Harry Reid. You need to understand that we have a problem with Social Security. That problem was created because of government taking that money out of the Social Security Trust Fund in 1990.
So Sharon Angle there was talking about Social Security in a spat. They went back and forth. She obviously unwrapped that prepackaged line. It's been played over and over again. Do you think that what would you make of the debate, and do you think it'll actually have any, will matter in this race?
Well, a couple things. First off, on that phrase, man up, I do think it's interesting. This seems to be the new catchphrase for 2010. We found a bunch of different examples for a story we did in Politico this morning of that being used. Of course, Robin Carnahan also yesterday used that against her opponent, Roy Blunt, in Missouri, telling him to man up. It was a year ago, now Governor Christie in New Jersey, I think first used that phrase that I had heard it. Like he said, when people were questioning his size, he said, "Man up and say I'm fat."
Right, they should
so
pay
man
him
up
royalties.
They should, because it definitely has gotten in the bloodstream. Now that race, you had two candidates who seemed determined. The debate last night, determined not to make big mistakes. To my mind, it made kind of a stilted performance. I think it is notable that the most important political analyst by far in Nevada is John Ralston with the Las Vegas paper. He came out and wrote an analysis this morning, said flatly that Angle won and Reid lost. I really wouldn't go that far. I didn't find either of the candidates that impressive, but I am struck that that was a pretty tepid performance by Reid when what he really needs is to figure out a way to put Angle away. He clearly didn't do that with that performance, and so a candidate who people have said is too extreme to win actually seems in pretty good position, has even odds, I think, of winning that race.
That's right. Well, and Angle, because Reid has painted her as this basically crazy person, I guess Ralston's point was she didn't come across as being crazy, and in a debate where Reid performed in such a lackluster fashion,
right,
just not losing on Angle's part made her look better.
Well, there's expectations game that we all play, and if you do it well, as long as you don't drool, you manage to win. I think objectively, anybody coming to this debate without the benefit of the expectations, chest bumping that always takes place, would say neither of these candidates were especially commanding on that stage. Right,
none of the above may have been the victor. Now let's go over to West Virginia, back across the country. We have the sitting governor, Manchin, who is in a tough race against John Racy, the Republican, and there is, the question about process stories and whether they ever affect races is one we all battle with all the time. Well, there was this ad in which there was a casting call for hickey actors from John Racy, and the Republicans in Washington said we had nothing to do with this. This was the casting group that was involved in making this ad. We're not, casting aspersions or saying anything bad about country folk in West Virginia. Then, and you guys broke this story, Politico broke this story, and all of a sudden it turns out, well, maybe there was a little bit more of a connection to the Republicans. Do you think this has any actual play in this race? There's some evidence that it might.
I think so. I mean, there is a new poll that shows Manchin now taking control of this race, which is what we always thought would happen. But he has gone through some roller coaster rides to the point he's at now. I don't think that this the ad is solely responsible for that, but I do think process stories, when they come at especially strategic moments in the campaign, can tend to amplify things that are happening anyway. They can really accelerate the momentum of one candidate, or in some cases halt the momentum of another. So in general, like elections typically are not decided by questions of political process, but campaigns matter, and in the closing weeks of a campaign, these kind of missteps I think can really have an impact.
We focused on these two races because in an equation where Republicans have to take 10 seats away from Democrats, these are two that are neck and neck, and they'll have to win them in order to get that 10. What's your sense right now of how it looks for Republicans? Do they have any shot at getting the 10? And if not, what do you think the new number is?
I think it's going to be virtually impossible for them not to pick up 6 or so, and also virtually impossible for them to pick up the full 10. It would really require running the table in places where, including a lot of places where that's unlikely.
I want to end with a story that's going to appear. It's appeared online already, but it's going to actually be in the newspaper, the New York Times Magazine this Sunday. Peter Baker wrote about the president, and in this piece, the president is already sort of looking at what Obama 2.0 looks like. What did you make of that piece?
Well, first off, it's a terrific piece that Peter Baker did. He had a bunch of different interviews, a couple of dozen he wrote in the article over at the White House, and most importantly, a pretty revealing interview with Obama himself. I was struck that Obama is clearly in a contemplative mood. He's analyzing what's gone right and what's not gone right with his presidency. I don't feel that he has either arrived in his own mind, or perhaps certainly is not yet willing to share kind of brutal candor. What he's got is sort of halfway candor. Well, we didn't do as good a job as we could at dealing with the politics, because of course we were so busy worrying about the policy. You know, it's kind of like the 7 stages of grief, or the 5 stages of grief, whatever they are, that politicians go through when things are not going well. The first step is always to say, we just didn't communicate well to get our message out, rather than a fundamental appraisal of whether substantively the message was right.
One of the things the president mentioned is that he's reading up about Bill Clinton in that 1994 period. You have, of course, written and studied Bill Clinton extensively, and I want to get your thoughts about the parallels there, and can President Obama take any lessons from Bill Clinton in terms of that Obama 2.0 after this election, which we know will be bad for Democrats? Is there anything he can take out of that Clinton lesson that might help him?
The much different times, obviously, and different circumstances in lots of different ways. I do think there's a parallel. Bill Clinton felt very much that he had lost control of his public image, that the electorate was not seeing him as he saw himself, and that there needed to be a sort of fundamental change in how he carried out his presidency to correct that. So that's a parallel. One thing I would add to that is that this is a harder process than people say. I sometimes see commentary, well, after the election, Obama will need to, take a sidestep to the right, just as Bill Clinton did, and then he'll be in great shape for re-election. Bill Clinton's reappraisal in those years and sort of restructuring of his presidency in '95 and '96 was a brutal process. It was politically difficult. It was for him internally was emotionally difficult, and what's more, it was incomplete. Remember, Bill Clinton did move to the center, but he still only got 49% of the vote. So sort of triangulating or moving to the center, or whatever you call it, is not such an easy thing to do.
Right, you can't add water. John Harris, thank you so much for all that insight. We love being with you.
Okay, see you soon, John. Bye-bye.
Okay, now we turn to senior political producers Rob Henin and Jill Jackson, who join us, as they do every week, with hot ads of the week. Let's go through the first one, which is in the West Virginia race that we were talking about. Governor Manchin has gone to the gun closet.
That's right, and he has not only gone to the gun closet, but he actually, I was in West Virginia earlier this week. He told us that, if you can't handle a gun in West Virginia, you shouldn't run for office in West Virginia. So
let's take a look. You have to wear an orange vest now to cover this race. Let's toss the ad here.
I'm Joe Manchin. I approve this ad because I'll always defend West Virginia.
As your senator, I'll protect our Second Amendment rights. That's why the NRA endorsed me. I'll take on Washington and this administration to get the federal government off of our backs and out of our pockets. I'll cut federal spending, and I'll repeal the bad parts of Obamacare. I sued EPA, and I'll take dead aim at the cap and trade bill, because it's bad for West Virginia.
Well, there we have it.
He's trying to show that he's tough, that he's independent. The whole Republican line of attack is that he's going to be a rubber stamp for Obama, and so he's trying to highlight that he's already sued the EPA while Obama was president, that he's against this cap and trade bill that's very unpopular and that heavily that big coal mining state. And you know, he's just basically trying to also remind people that he's their governor and that they know who he is.
Right. So he's gone from being a rubber stamp to being somebody the Secret Service has to worry about. Rob, let's go number 2, our second ad. What's that one?
It's a similar gun-toting liberal theme, and it's in Missouri, where Ike Skelton, who's been a congressman for, I think, 17 terms, has got a tough battle, and he took an ad out also with a gun.
All right, let's take a look at our second gun ad of the week.
The right to keep and bear arms is fundamental to Missouri's rural heritage. But when Vicki Hartzler had a chance to defend the Second Amendment, she took a stand against the NRA, opposing concealed carry. Vicki Hartzler thought government should decide, not gun owners. Ike Skelton knows what the Second Amendment means to rural Missouri. That's why the NRA endorses Ike and asks all Missouri gun owners, hunters, and NRA members to vote for Ike Skelton for Congress.
I'm Ike Skelton, and I approve this message.
No actual gun, but still the message is clear.
Yes, this is, I think, these two ads are the parallel universe of ads right now. You have two liberal members of legislative Congress here, and you have a governor in West Virginia basically running as Republicans in any other year. That would never be a Democratic ad. They're endorsing gun ownership. They've got the NRA endorsement, which is interesting because the NRA will endorse incumbents over challengers if you have equally pro-gun credentials. And it's just, they're going to issues that are off the economy, that are off of spending. It's, let's go back to guns. And let's try to make it this. Here you have saying a Republican is soft on guns.
Right. Do what we can to connect with voters that we're not otherwise connecting with. All right, let's look at our third ad here. This is from Jack Conway, who's running against Rand Paul in Kentucky's Senate race.
From Rand Paul.
The real answer to Medicare would be a $2,000 deductible.
A $2,000 deductible?
Rand Paul wants us to pay $2,000 just to get Medicare?
That's crazy. I can't afford that.
The real answer to Medicare would be a $2,000 deductible.
I don't know what planet he's from.
Rand Paul is off the wall with a $2,000 deductible.
Doesn't he know that we can't afford that?
The more we hear about Rand Paul, the worse it gets.
I'm Jack Conway, and I approve this message.
All right, Jill, seems pretty straightforward.
Yes, and this is really, once again, Democrats really trying to paint some of these Tea Party Senate candidates as extreme, and in this case, really trying to put that, they're trying to target seniors, obviously, and scare them a little bit about what that extremity means.
Right, it's seniors vote, and a big and important voting block there. All right, we're going to now look, last ad here will be from that debate last night. Already there's an ad. Now let's take a look at it.
Is there anything the insurance companies should be mandated to cover? Anything?
Anything at all?
At the debate, Sharon Angle couldn't think of a single thing insurance companies should be made to cover. Not one thing. Not colon cancer tests, not mammograms, not autism, nothing.
Anything at all?
Okay, so no insurance mandates.
Not if Sharon Angle has her way. That's extreme and dangerous.
Well, you see, you've already talked about the man up, and what Angle's people want is man up to be played every day from here until the election in Nevada. And what Reed wants to do is say she's crazy, she's extreme, and now they're adding extreme and dangerous about insurance and say that she's on the side of the insurance company. So Reed's trying to take advantage of what he thought was a win last night on that point and remind voters in Nevada that, okay, she said man up, but she's on the side of the insurance company against basic things like mammograms and colon cancer screening, which is important and something that he's talked about for the middle class. She's not.
Right, and something that has wide popularity in well outside of just Democratic circles.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Jill, thanks so much. Rob, thank you.
Sure.
And finally today, we're joined by Ari Berman of The Nation and author of the newly released Herding Donkeys, The Fight to Rebuild the Democratic Party and Reshape American Politics. People are obsessed with the Tea Party these days, but there was and continues to be an important grassroots resurgence inside the Democratic Party as well. This book gives an inside look at that phenomenon. Welcome, Ari.
Thanks for having me, John.
Oh, all right. Now, before we move to this election, let's go back and remind people what we had before, this change in the Democratic coalition.
Yeah. Well, I wrote the book Herding Donkeys because I wanted to tell what I viewed as the bigger picture story behind the grassroots movement that really defined Barack Obama's presidential campaign in 2008. And I believe, and I think history has shown, that that really began with Howard Dean's campaign for president in 2003, which I think looked radically different than both the Bush campaign and the Gore campaign in 2000. It really was the first campaign of the 21st century. And like it or not, and Dean's obviously a very divisive person, but he had a lot of influence both in his presidential campaign and as chair of the party. And some of the things he was trying to do were very much built upon by the Obama campaign.
That's right. So this is because there are a lot of people who think, oh, Barack Obama came along, all these people came into the system.
Yeah.
But your point, it seems to me, is that there was a wave that Barack Obama rode rather than creating.
Absolutely. And Barack Obama was really able to expand what Dean did. But Dean really came in and he challenged the Democratic Party on some core fronts, including the war in Iraq, which Barack Obama, of course, did. They were both insurgents in a way. I mean, Dean was much more of an insurgent. But Barack Obama, remember, I mean, he was challenging the Clintons, so he was challenging the powers that be. And he had to find a model where he could, in some sense, bypass key parts of the Washington establishment. And Dean was able to do that a little bit in his presidential campaign in terms of how he's raising money on the internet and lowering the barriers for entry in terms of people getting involved in politics. And then when he became chair of the party, I mean, it's interesting, an anti-establishment guy becomes chair of the Democratic Party. It was kind of unheard of for that to happen.
Right, it would be, to mangle the analogy a little bit though, but if Sarah Palin became the chair of the RNC, I mean, here you have an insurgent kind of person who's good with the grassroots but not liked by the establishment.
Yeah.
There were some battles between Reed and the establishment. Sorry, not Reed, between Dean and the establishment.
Yeah. Most notably Rahm Emanuel.
Precisely. So wait a minute. You've got the guy who is the insurgent Democrat, and then now the guy he was battling with was the chief of staff. How did this tension that was kind of built into the Democratic Party play out from when what you write about all the way through into the beginning of the Obama administration?
Yeah, well, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. I mean, Dean very much challenged the Clinton model of 1990s style politics, and in some ways, Rahm Emanuel personified that. And so when Dean became chair of the party, Rahm didn't have a whole lot of regard for him or his activists, and basically thought, Dean should give him a lot of money for his targeted congressional races, which I think was a valid point. But Dean also had a valid point, which is, I'm doing this 50-state strategy. I'm trying to rebuild local Democratic parties across the map. Let's do both. And I think, when Obama came along, he was also trying to build, in some ways, a 50-state campaign, and he was campaigning in all these states in the primary and building these expansive organizations in places like Idaho, where the Clintons were really running much more of a 1990s version in the 21st century. But of course, as you say, it gets more complicated because, after the election, Rahm sort of sits the Clinton-Obama race out because he's tight with both sides, and then becomes chief of staff, and then people like Dean get somewhat pushed out of the picture, which I think becomes symbolic because a lot of the grassroots activists and organizers who feel that Obama has vindicated their work really don't have a place at the White House at the end of the day.
Well, and that's the problem, because the reason this is so interesting, it seems to me, is that the Democratic Party has to rebuild itself. And the question is, do you say we rebuild it on this model over here, or this old model that you write about that existed before Obama came along, which in some ways, to do that, you have to admit that you've been doing this other thing wrong, going the wrong route. How do you think that gets worked out? I mean, who controls the rebuilding that goes on here?
Yeah, well, Dean left Obama with a much stronger Democratic Party, and he tried to put a lot of new people in the party and institutionalize some of that, and there was all these different organizers in all these different states who were working through party channels, and I think doing a pretty good job. Now, I think the Obama people thought they could improve on that and do it better and get all the different Obama people in the party, but that hasn't really translated, and I think what they should have done after the election is they should have taken the Dean model and expanded it, and basically said, okay, we're going to keep the Democratic Party strong, and we're going to bring all our supporters in not necessarily into the Democratic Party, but just involved in the legislative process, those independents, those Republicans, those younger voters. But what's happened is, instead, the Democratic Party has gotten somewhat weaker institutionally, and the Obama people haven't really been meaningfully involved in the legislative process or in the governing of Washington. So I think both segments now are a bit disillusioned as a result.
There's a bit of a debate now in Democrats. It's getting more heated the closer we get to Election Day, and it looks like a bad day for Democrats. And that debate, as it's been explained to me, is the Obama team and the DNC focused on these first-time voters, the 15 million who turned out for Obama, spent a lot of energy going after them, and neglected through time and attention the real base, that wave that existed before Obama, the Latinos, young millennials, young voters, African Americans, the kind of core middle of the Democratic Party. Do you see it that way?
I see it, a little bit that way. I mean, I think both core Democrats and I think the younger Obama surge voters were somewhat expecting him to change the culture of Washington. Now, obviously, that was a vague mandate. I think that was part of the problem. But however naive it was, they did really expect that he was going to shake up what they viewed as sort of a dysfunctional Washington system and get a lot done, and also get it done, I think, in a cleaner way than it has gotten done. So things like healthcare, which I think were major legislative victories, because how messy the process was, they almost now look like defeats in a way. And the president and his party aren't running on them either. So I think they don't see, the Democrats don't see a strong, articulate Democratic agenda being put forward by Democratic candidates, and at the same time, the Obama surge voters and that broader coalition doesn't see him as the personification of a different kind of politics anymore. And I think those two things combine, and they are somewhat at odds, but he was trying to do both. I think it is part of the problem that we're having in 2010, obviously coupled with a very bad economy and an anti-incumbent mood. And so I think in terms of 2012, that's one of the things he's going to have to try to figure out how to recalibrate on.
To put it back together. Okay, Ari Berman, the book is Herding Donkeys. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks a lot for having me.
And thanks all of you for watching Washington Unplugged. Join us here every day on CBSNews.com. I'm John Dickerson. Have a great weekend.